வணக்கம். குரு பிரம்மா, குரு விஷ்ணு, குருதேவோ மகேஸ்வரः, குரு சாக்ஷாத் பரம்பிரம்ம தஸ்மை ஸ்ரீ குரவே நமः. We are here today to resume our thoughts about some great women of India. We call these people great. We label them great. But there is a question here. Why are they great? What did they do to become great? I shall reframe the question in a different way. Did all these people perform something extraordinary? When you call someone great, does it mean that person has done something which others could not do? Of course, there are a few of them who have been extraordinary achievers. There are a few of them who had done something which others, you and me, cannot do. But that is not the reason to call one person a great person. There is something else, something more to it. Great people need not necessarily perform something which cannot be done by others. They may do even the simplest of the simple things, but they do it with a touch which imparts class to that action. They may be doing something very, very small, very simple, but do it with that kind of devotion and dedication that the entire act becomes extraordinary and great. And that is why we call these people great. Today, we shall see examples of such great women, women who were very ordinary, who appeared ordinary, who did something very small, but did it with utmost care and devotion that even the Lord, even the God Himself came down to appreciate that small little action. The first example is from the southern part of the country, namely Tamil Nadu. In the 6th century, in a small place called Tiruppananthal, which is even today a part of the Tamil land, lived a woman by name Tatakai. Of course, the name sounds familiar, isn't it? We have heard of Tataka of the Ramayana. It is the same name, Tataka or Tatakai. However, this Tatakai is someone who could be called exactly opposite or diametrically opposite to the Ramayanic character whom we all are familiar with. What did this Tataka do? She was the daughter of the local priest. The priest performed the daily rites and rituals in the temple. There is a Shivan temple in that place. The temple is present even today. And in those days, the priest was in charge of the temple, performing the daily rites, the rituals, the ceremonies, the pujas, and all those that had to be done. This little girl, the daughter of the priest, would accompany him, help him in whatever way she could, fetch some water, fetch flowers, and help the father perform the rituals. She was so accustomed to all those ceremonies and rituals that whenever the father had to be away on some important work, she herself could probably do the rest of the ceremony. As she grew, she went to the flower garden, picked up all those flowers, and made beautiful garlands to the Lord. Every day she'll make colorful garlands and give it to the father, or take it herself to the temple, place it in the sanctum for the garland to be presented to Lord Shiva. One day it so happened that she made a beautiful garland and she took it to the sanctum. She had grown a little big. So, what she had done by that time was she would make the garland, take it, and place it on the Shivalinga herself. Many of you should be aware that Lord Shiva is worshipped in the form of a Shivalinga in most of the temples. So, the Shivalinga has something called a pedestal, which is called the Avudai in Tamil. And then above the avudai, above the pedestal, is a conical portion, a linear portion, something like a cylinder. So this Tataka would take the garland, go near the Shivalinga, and then, put the garland over the cylindrical portion. The cylindrical portion is called the Bana of the Shivalinga. She would do that every day. The father, the priest, also knew she was doing that. And since she was adept in the mantras and in all the scriptures, the father also would permit her to do this. She would do it and no one else knew about it. The father knew. God, of course, knew. Probably God thought he should make this girl's devotion known to everyone. It is enough if the God knows, but then the God wills that it should be known to others, not because of any other reason, but because others can also follow the same way. Now, probably the Lord decided that others should know of this little girl's devotion. So that day, she went into the flower room. In olden temples, there used to be a flower room where they'll keep all the flowers, and that is where someone will sit and make the garlands. And from the garland room or the flower room, the garland would be taken and brought to the sanctum sanctorum. This girl made the garland in the flower room, and from the flower room, she just picked up the garland, holding the garland in both her arms. That is how we normally hold the garland, isn't it? It was a huge garland. And when you hold it, both your arms are holding the garland and you cannot do anything else with your hands. The hands are literally tied with the garland or tied to the garland. So this girl picked up the garland and she walked from the flower room to the sanctum. As she came close to the Shivalinga, She suddenly realized her garment, her dress, her attire was becoming loose. The garment was slipping. She didn't know what to do. She thought for a second and she just held her elbows close to her body so that her garment would be caught. It would not slip down. So she held her elbows close to the body. With the garland in hand, she walked. Just imagine how difficult it is to walk when you're holding the garland with both your arms and you don't want it to fall down, because the garland which is to go to the god cannot fall down, cannot be kept down, and the elbows are tightly locked in order to prevent the dress from falling down or slipping down. She was not able to stretch her hands. Normally, if you want to place the garland on the Shivalinga, you stay close to the Shivalinga. Remember, the Shivalinga has a pedestal, so you cannot be very close to the Shivalinga. You will be just about 1.5 to 2 feet away. And from there, you have to stretch your hands to place the garland. Now, this girl, little girl she was caught. She was not able to stretch her hands. At the same time, she didn't want her dress to slip. She didn't know what to do. And in that moment of grief, she was grief struck because for a second she thought, oh Lord, oh Shiva, every day I used to bring this garland and drape it on me. Today I'm not in a position to do so. What kind of a pitiable state is that? I want to place this garland on you. She was grief struck. And in that moment of grief, she thought, oh Shiva, why don't you do something to take this garland from my hands? You must understand the sentiments of the girl. This girl was not wanting the Lord to shower her with any great favor. She was not that kind at all. Some of us think God should give us great favors. No, this girl was not that kind of a girl. She was a very ordinary person. She knew what she was. She understood her limitations. She had no such ambitious aspirations. She thought she was very ordinary. All that she had was that amount of love, immeasurable love and immeasurable devotion that she wanted to give that garland. So she prayed. She prayed intensely. Shiva, please take this garland from my hands. Remember, she didn't say, I have to place it on you. She only said, Shiva, please take it from my hands. And you know what happened? As she was standing there, not able to outstretch her hands, tightly keeping her elbows on her body, kind of restricted, the Bana of the Shivalinga leaned over. Shiva himself leaned over. The Bana is normally straight. We all have seen Shivalinga in the Shiva temple, isn't it? The Bana is straight. But here what happened? The Bana leant. It leaned over and then came like that. Supposing a child is offering something to an elderly person or an adult. The child is short. And what do? We just bend down like that to accept from the child. Similarly, the Shivalinga itself leaned over and came down like that to accept the garland from this little girl, Tadaka, without her stretching the arm. without giving her the difficulty of stretching the arm. As she was holding the garland, the Shivalinga came and accepted the garland. And this happened. Even this, nobody ever knew. She was there in the sanctum, and of course, Lord Shiva was in the sanctum and no one else. The next morning, the chief priest or her father opened the sanctum with all the customary zeal and then suddenly found the Shivalinga is tilted, toppled like that. Something like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which all have read in the textbooks. This Shivalinga was toppled like that. And he didn't know what had happened. He thought something went wrong. So he tried putting it back in position. He tried with all his co-employees, the other priests there, they all tried, the temple employees tried. They could not. They didn't know what to do. Then the chief priest thought it was good for him to go and report the matter to the king, because the king should know something wrong. They all thought there was something wrong here. They didn't know what had happened, and this little girl also didn't say anything about it. She didn't know what to say, and she was so shocked, she didn't say anything. So all the elders decided that they would go and report the matter to the king. They went to the king and reported the matter. The king came to the temple. He was also shocked. The king was a very pious and a well-minded king. He was a very generous person, but also a pious person at the same time. With that kind of a pious temperament, he just prayed to the Lord. What went wrong in my country? Did I do anything wrong? Was there something wrong in my administration that this has happened? He couldn't find the answer. He was a little disturbed. He went to the palace, and that night he retired in disturbance. But then the Lord appeared to the king in his dream and then told the king, it was only to accept the garland from that little girl that I had to lean. I bent down to her devotion. I bowed to her devotion. And it is so pleasant to have leaned over and accepted the garland. The king then knew. Next morning he came to the temple, called the priest, called this little girl, and gave the information to everybody. He made it known to the whole world that it was to accept this little girl's devotion and love and compassion that the Lord had done this. The story does not stop there. On one side, all of us want to be like that little girl, Tadaka, isn't it? We all want to be having that kind of devotion, that kind of dedication, that kind of involvement in that activity that we do. It is not that she did something extraordinary. You may ask me, what was so important about that garland? Nothing. The garland was made of flowers. It was as ordinary as any garland could be. But the importance is not in the type of flowers, not in the type of garland, but in that devotion she had. However, as I told you, the story does not stop there. There is a sequelae to the story. The Shivalinga of Tirupanandal was tilted. The king tried, he could not put it back. The king tried with all his resources. When the priest tried, it was only little resources. The king had so much of resources, he made so many of his people come and try. He made the elephants pull. The Shivalinga was tied with ropes, and the ropes were pulled by elephants. Even the elephant power could not put the Shivalinga back in position. The Lord was so very happy to be permanently tilted like that for that little girl's devotion. Much later, a Shaivite devotee by name Kalayana came to that town. The king knew about the devotion of Kalayana. He came to know of it. And then he requested Kalayana if something can be done. Kalayana also never thought that he could do anything because he was an ordinary person, he thought. Only thing is, Kalayana wanted to be helpful to the king in making the Shivalinga come back to normal position. So what Kalayana did was, instead of the rope being tied to an elephant and the elephant pulling, Kalayana tied a rope to his neck and put that rope around Shivalinga and tried. And one pull, Lord Shiva came back to normal. What does it mean? The Lord wants to lean over towards people who have devotion, unadulterated devotion to the Lord. That is why he leaned over for the sake of the girl and he came back to normal position, not because the elephants pulled, but because one Kalayana, who was not a very hefty person, was an ordinary, average bodied person. And when Kalayana pulled, the Lord came back. Now think of it. When do we call someone great? Can we not call this little girl Tataka great? The Tataka of Tirupanandal. And what did she do? It was such an ordinary thing that she made garlands and presented the garlands. But then the greatness was not in making something extraordinary, but making the normal activity extraordinary. It was not an extraordinary activity, it was a normal activity that became extraordinary because of the extraordinary devotion that this little girl had. I would also want to think of one other woman here. This was not a little girl, but an old woman. This old woman was a pious lady. She was in the evening of our life. She had lived through and she was in ripe old age, but a very, very good lady with a very compassionate temperament. She was called Aragi. She also belonged to the Tamil land and she lived in the town of Tanjavur. The name Aragi is very interesting. In the Tamil language, Aragi means one who is beautiful. But here was a woman who was old, with lots of wrinkles, not appearing beautiful for the physical outward look. We all generally call someone beautiful only when they have a beautiful outwardly appearance, isn't it? But this lady probably was called Adagi because she was very beautiful in her younger days, but now she had grown old. She had lots of wrinkles. She could not move very fast. She had her own limitations because of old age. But what happened? You all would have heard of the second imperial dynasty of the Chola land. Sometime in the 10th century, King Vijayalaya established the second imperial dynasty, or the later Chola dynasty as it is called. In this dynasty was the very famous Rajaraja the First, King Arulmozhivarman, also called King Rajaraja or Rajaraja Cholan. Rajaraja Cholan ruled in the latter part of 10th century and extended till the early part of 11th century. That is, sometime from 985 to 1014. King Rajaraja was a great ruler and a very pious ruler too. He was a devotee of Lord Shiva. He wanted to build a big temple dedicated to the Lord. And we all know he built the big temple of Tanjavur. The temple itself is called the Big Temple or the Periya Koyil in Tamil. The Lord of the temple is Lord Brihadishwara or Peruvudayar. Brihat will mean huge or big. The Shivalinga is so huge and so big that the Lord himself is called Brihadishwara. And the temple came to be called the Big Temple or the Rajarajeshwaram. Now the story goes to the time when the temple was being constructed. The big temple was being constructed, and you can imagine for such a huge temple to be constructed, how many artisans would have been working. The construction workers, the artisans, the sculptors, the people who are making so many things for the temple. And the construction work went on for many years. It is said that it went on for about 7-8 years. And as the work was progressing, groups and groups of people used to be sitting here, some of them sculpting something, some of them doing something else, and some of them carrying the stones. Huge stones had to be carried, granite stones, to make the pillars, the mantaps, and so on. And Adagi wanted to contribute in some way. She knew the temple was being constructed and she wanted to do something because she thought she would also have to contribute. So she came and sat there. She used to come there every day to the construction site and keep looking at all those people and ask them, give me some little work so that I can do. But what work could they give her? All those people who were working there were not old people. They were all young, energetic people. They had to carry granite stones. They had to chisel out. And this old lady cannot do all that. On account of her old age, ripe age, they could not give her any work. So she'll go and sit in one corner, keep looking at them, keep looking at the way they were working, all the time thinking, can I not be of some help? May I not contribute in some little way to the construction of this temple? And one day she found her way out. She was just looking at them. They would work day and night, and most part of the year it used to be sunny. In the afternoons, they will be working under the sun. You may ask, did they not have anything over them, some kind of a roof? It is not possible to have such kind of a roof or some covering all the time. Those of you who have seen the big temple or have heard of the big temple will know that the tower runs so high, the Vimana. It is not possible to have a roof all the time. Even today, even when we construct our own houses, it is not possible to have a roof over the construction, isn't it? In some places, you may have a small shed, but not all over. So many of them were working in the hot sun, and they all would become so thirsty. Continuous labor, continuous work, they would become so thirsty, and Aragi knew what to do. From the next day onwards, she used to bring pots and pots of buttermilk and go to each artisan, not sit in one place, but then carry that glass of buttermilk, take it, go next to the artisan when they would be involved in working, all the time involved in working, all concentrated effort. She would just go and give them that buttermilk, which would be something like a nectar to them at that point of time. And she did this continuously every day until the construction got over. Now comes the point of importance. The temple was almost completed. The construction was over, everything in place. And what happens in a temple? The most important ceremony in a temple is to perform the Kumbhabhishekam, or the consecration of the Lord and consecration of the Sanctum Sanctorum, isn't it? The king came, saw everything, he was so happy, and they decided that the Kumbhabhishekam will be performed on a particular day. So they decided the date of the Kumbhabhishekam. Everything was planned, all work allocated, everything was carried out to precision, because King Rajaraja always believed in doing things the right way. So everything was set. The day before the Kumbhabhishekam, King Rajaraja was so happy, so satisfied, content, because the temple had come out to his heart's desire, and he was just brooding over, he was thinking, what a lovely temple, and how many generations of devotees would come here in future times. And as he was thinking, suddenly he heard a voice, and he was just surprised because no one was around him. And what is this voice? And he realized it was the Lord's voice. You know what the Lord said? Lord Shiva said, Rajaraja, I'm so happy to be residing under the shade that Aragi has given me. I'm so happy to be dwelling under the shades of Aragi's devotion. The king was taken aback. He didn't know what shade is this that the Lord is talking about. And who's Aragi? He didn't know who Aragi was. Nevertheless, he thought maybe Aragi is one of those artisans working there. And what has she done? Probably she is the one who carved the sculptures in the Sanctum Sanctorum or something like that. Let me go see in the morning. So the next morning, as every arrangement for the consecration was getting ready, the king went to the temple and then searched for where Adagi worked. I want to know what work did Adagi do. I want to know. And as he was asking, the chief sculptor and the artisans and all of them, they all said, Adagi? Adagi worked? No, there's no artisan by name Adagi here. No, no one by name Adagi here. But as the king kept on inquiring about Adagi, the artisans came out with another answer. They said, Raja, we did not have any Adagi do anything here, but then Adagi is that old lady who gave us buttermilk. They all had grown so fond of her. She was like mother to them, quenching their thirst, giving them life, giving them concentration, giving them all that involvement they could have in that work. So they were all so fond of her. They said, she's like a mother to us. She used to get us buttermilk. The king said, I want to see Adagi. And someone ran and brought Adagi. Adagi was standing in one corner. She was such an old lady. What could she do in all that pomp and splendor? She was in one corner. They brought her in. They brought her next to the Raja. And then the Raja realized. He just bowed down to her and said, Amma, the Lord is so pleased to be resting under the shade that you have given. What does it mean? Adagi gave buttermilk in a way she gave shade to the artisans. She gave compassion to the artisans. She showed them all compassion and affection. And the Lord had taken that compassion and affection and said, I'm happy to be residing in that shade given by Adagi. Even today in Tanjavur, you can see a place called the Adagi Gardens. The place where her hut was is supposed to be the place called Adagi Gardens. And even today, people remember the contribution of Adagi. I'm even told that the very same place where Adagi's hut was had in the 20th century and subsequently become the place that houses the office of the municipal commissioner of that area. What kind of a devotion shown by a very, very ordinary, average woman. She did not even have youth and energy, but then she had the mind. She had the mind to show compassion to everyone. She did not make any distinction. She did not say, I would do only to the Lord, I would do only in the sanctorum. But then that ordinary artisan, many of those names which she would not have known and we also do not know today. But then she was able to see the Lord Himself in those artisans. That is why that small little act became the shade for the Lord Himself. So remember, great people do not become great because they perform something extraordinary, but they become great because they perform something, a simple act even, with utmost devotion, care, and compassion. It is that devotion, compassion, equanimity, and beholding godliness in everything that accords greatness to anyone. We have known two of such great women today. We shall meet again with the stories of some more great women.